world is full of misperceptions and assumptions because we're working in a pretty flat medium. When we don't have all the information, which is common when working virtually, we tend to fill in the blanks. We create the answers we seek if we don't have the information available, and that breeds misunderstanding and wrong conclusions. We don't have the human signals that we all rely on to understand each other, so we're filling in blanks. We might say that virtual workplace is full of conflict landmines that our managers, our colleagues, and we ourselves need to be able to identify and respond to in order to maintain productivity and harmony in our teams. So Kathy's going to get us started with some basics.
Right, and Gretchen has shared that distrust between supervisor-employee or even among teammates, that someone is not working the hours they say they are or not pulling the weight that they say they should. This is a huge challenge today because so many of our leaders and our individual contributors have assumed value to the organization through sight. If I'm here, I'm working, you know, I'm putting in my hours and not focusing on the results. So it's not really about what are the activities you did today, but what are the results that you achieved today. And getting that is a tremendous switch, especially if your organization's a little more traditional. So what can you do or provide to your leaders to help them? Because today, I think the word of the day is empathy. We have to enable and empower our managers to be empathetic, because if I am watching my granddaughter, because my daughter's an essential worker, tomorrow, you know, for a couple hours during meetings that I'm having, I'm just going to have to tell them that either I'm not coming to the meeting or you're going to hear some background noise. So that's such an important one for all of us to consider and decide, how can we help people get through these? And Olivia says conflicts among hands-on managers who are micromanaging and frustrating their staff. And that is so true. There's two spectrums when it comes to managing. Either, you know, sometimes your leaders are real hands-off, sometimes your leaders are real hands-on, and sometimes they're in the middle. And we need all those varieties of leaders to support our organization. But during this time, we have to encourage our managers to tip one way or the other, right? If you're super hands-on, you may be feeling really out of control right now because how you led and controlled in the past isn't working today. So empowering them or giving them some tools to enable trust, and Trina's going to talk about building swift trust on teams. And conversely, if you're hands-off, you might have, you know, individual contributors kind of running amok, going, I don't know what to do. I'm uncertain. I'm stressed. I don't know if I'm doing it right. They need to be a little bit more hands-on. So having conversations and resources available to your leaders about how to tip one way or the other to make sure that they are helping their teams be successful and not enabling these toxic feelings to fester and grow in this time of uncertainty, because that is, you know, that is ripe right now. Uncertainty is ripe. I want to do just some quick overview as we consider and talk about conflicts, about the types of conflicts, and identify what are some of the sources. Because as I reviewed the facts around conflict, they don't really change that much, no matter where it's happening or where it's coming from. When conflict happens, it really is usually just one of two things. It's task-related or it's relational, right? Past conflicts tend to be, you know, super straightforward to resolve, and they can lead to better ways of doing things. It's you know, these are the good conflicts. There's an entire set of conflicts that are absolutely healthy for the structure of our teams and of our organizations. And sometimes even the difference of opinion about how to approach a task can open up new possibilities in the right environment, or it can completely lock people into a power struggle. And the other one, relationship conflicts. Now, I think these are much more difficult to resolve. They can lead to, I think there's a lot of avoidance instead of the honest effort of working together to try and come to a resolution. One of the most common reasons that we know people leave their jobs is because the differences with their managers, they can't work it out. But in this new reality, relationship conflict, as we've seen a couple examples on the screen here, relationship conflict is the reason people are just shutting down. They're not participating anymore. It's because it's just easier to avoid when we're all working apart from each other than it is to address. And during this time of fear, people tend to shudder, climb under the table and stay safe until this mess is over. And then, and only then, do I think I want to climb out and try to do what I can to resolve the situation that's keeping me up at night. So once you've identified, as you're casting your eye across the world of conflict and what's happening in your organization, once you have identified that source, the next step is really to understand the type. And again, simple stuff. There are usually two types of conflict that are team specific and most common for organizations and for team leaders, that include individual conflict, which is simple stuff, one-on-one interaction, and the other is team conflict that involves two or more individuals working together. But I have noticed in these past 2 weeks, there's one more type of conflict, and I call it a conflict of one. And this is, and it's happened to me, and I know it's happened to people in my life from conversations, but it's individuals perceiving that there is a conflict where there is nothing. There is no conflict. So as we all work in a more of this vacuum, the feelings of uncertainty and isolation can trigger our inner voices and create all kinds of drama. And if you agree with that, let me know. Put a check mark up on the screen with your annotation pen, or type, it's happened, I've seen it in the comment section, because interactions that usually start out small, that could, they're going to be nothing, but if we don't have that benefit of that instant face-to-face reaction, they cause tremendous challenge. And it's not just in the workplace, but any place that provides that real or perceived distance. So think about it, driving a car. I've seen some pretty aggressive behavior from people driving a car, or leaving those anonymous comments online, or yelling at the automated lady who's answering the phone at the bank. I've been guilty of this, screaming, agent, representative, Put a comment in the comment box if you have noticed that the acceleration to anger in these distant situations, if you notice, do they happen faster? Because the surroundings that keep us well behaved have changed dramatically. Questions, challenges, disagreements that all started out as almost non-factors can accelerate very quickly. And I just put a little scenario together. This happened to me a few years ago, but I got an email from a client, and she says, I need to report ASAP, exclamation point. And I read it, and I couldn't see her and I couldn't hear her. I saw all the caps, I saw the exclamation point, and so my mind jumps into overdrive, and the first thing I do is, oh my God, did I forget, am I late? So I look, no, I'm not late. I am not late. I haven't done anything wrong, so now I'm defensive. And then I'm wondering, why is she yelling at me, right? I was going to read it through one more time, but not anymore, Mrs. I'm in a big hurry. No, I'm going to slap it on my email, and I'm going to capitalize T or HERE exclamation point and send it off. And because it's a client, I do have the ability to calm myself down. But I did. I just kind of went. I went here, dot, and I sent it. And I wanted her to know that I was not happy. It wasn't my usual nice, happy message. Hey, how you doing? Here you go. Hope meets your expectations. I was mad. So at one time or another, we have all been here. Would you agree? Over the years, Trina and I have worked with hundreds of virtual teams, and we have identified some of the top causes of virtual conflict. But today, again, our situations are a little different. So I want to share just a couple of examples of conflict that you may be seeing today, or you can anticipate seeing them in the near future. And the first one is individual contributors working today to reorganize the way they work. I've worked with a lot of clients, and I'm hearing from them that their people are saying, I am having a very hard time staying organized or figuring out how to start my day. And what can the organization do to help them establish a better schedule, or to establish some continuity. Because when there's so much uncertainty and isolation, there's a higher episodes of conflict. So here's some best tips that I've heard and that I've shared recently that include increasing communication, and I'm sure you're doing this, giving your leaders and managers some best practices about being more intentional with their communication, about providing structure, because more structure reduces conflict in uncertain times. And of course, having conversations about your personal obligations. I did 4 trainings yesterday with teams talking about have this conversation about personal obligations and experiences with each other, and remind everybody to be fluid and to be flexible as our daily and demands in our of work and our demands of our personal life, they fall into the same bucket, right? And finally, taking lessons learned as a team and incorporating new processes will also help individuals and teams stabilize what can be a really emotional time for everybody. Now, Trina, she's at the in a little bit, she's going to share resources. She's got a wonderful book about the best way for teams to come together to, number 1, reduce the occurrence of conflict, and number 2, resolve conflict immediately. And I know for myself and my fellow Minnesotans, we are all working very, very hard to let go of our passive aggressive tendencies. And that's one thing we can all do. Technology, we are doing a lot of our communication through technology. We are using email, and we are instant messaging, and we are using video calls and conference calls. And I'm going to share this clip with you. It's an old clip, and I imagine you have seen this. Uh-oh. Oh, there we go. Hold on.
We don't have sound, but what is happening is like a typical video conference where we can't see each other and people are trying to add value and they're talking at the same time. And what is the end result? We simply stop trying. Back to Kathy.
Okay, sorry, guys. That worked much better in rehearsal. But I think if you haven't seen this, this is a hilarious little video clip to share with your teams as you navigate, if these are uncharted waters for you. We all know that talking over each other, it can become so frustrating. And I have been on calls myself where I just there's no conflict.
There are two principles that I want to share before getting. I'm hearing feedback.
It's me. I'm done.
All right. Two principles that I want to share with everybody about how we as human beings approach conflict and how we see life. And they really are important to keep in mind as we figure out this new world of working together apart. The first is that we all as human beings, the culture we live in, the work culture, the societal culture, the home culture, and the experiences in our past and our everyday way of working impact how we see the world. We see through filters. Our perspective is biased in a sense and never truly pure. So we're going to put an image up on the screen right now, and some of you are going to see one word and some of you are going to see another word. Your experience, your past informs whether or not you see good or whether or not you see evil. And isn't conflict in some ways the same way? I don't know of very many people who say, oh, I'm in the middle of a conflict, and they mean that as a good thing. Most of us look at conflict as evil or as a bad thing to be avoided. And sometimes that is true. We're talking about preventing conflict, not running toward it with passion. At the same time, much conflict that is happening on your teams right now is essential in order to work out new, better ways to communicate and connect and get the work moved through your team, because you're in a suddenly new environment overnight without proper planning. So let's all just kind of reframe conflict to be a good thing that helps us get better rather than something to be avoided. We want to work better together even when we're apart. The second principle is that context helps us fill in the blanks. In the absence of information, people will draw conclusions on their own, and they may not be the right conclusions. When working virtually, people are often missing context. Those bits of information we gather when we're with people in the same room, and we can easily see facial expressions and talk to all of the relevant people who are there. When working virtually, we need to be explicit and intentional about providing information. More context is needed to fill in that bigger picture for teams. So when you look at this picture, type in the chat, and what do you see? If you do see something, just add it in the chat and we'll see. Okay, so some people are already doing that. All right. All right, so let's do one thing. Let's add one piece of information to this picture. And now let's see what you recognize. Many of you, like Sarah and Melanie, let's go ahead. Now you can see the Dalmatians, right? Many of you saw Dalmatians, but a lot of you did not. With the tongue there, everyone sees the Dalmatian. So keep that in mind. What information, if you share it, will help create that common language. A few quick tips that I'll share with you, and please add more tips in the chat if you have some as well, that will help you quickly provide context to people without taking a huge chunk of time. First, confirm project expectations, confirm deliverables, make sure your team is all in agreement about what we're here to do and what we're expected to do by when. Who needs to communicate with whom about what, how often, and who else needs to be informed or involved. Share common language so that you know you're all meaning the same thing. Also, who else has a stake in your team's success that you need to be communicating with beyond and outside of your team boundaries? It's an opportunity to break down silos in your organization by busting through virtual walls. And create those frequent team feedback loops and stakeholder feedback loops so that you get reassured that the understanding is clear. In other words, clarify and verify meaning a lot more often than you used to do. And learn the tools together. We're all learning new technology tools, or many of you are learning new technology tools. Set up a learning session, a lunch and learn, and have some fun with it when the pressure is not on. Let's also talk about team dynamics now. conflict happens between people. So team dynamics is an important part of having a high-performing virtual team. Sometimes they just get in the way of great performance. Do you ever wonder how such smart people can become so dumb when they come together? I mean, some teams really seem to revert back almost to junior high mentality. As Kathy said, we've worked with hundreds of virtual teams, and it's kind of funny how you see a really bright person become suddenly dumbstruck in a virtual team. So how a team handles those early conflicts when you go virtual really drives a team's long-term trust and ability to be smart together. If you're not talking outside of the formal communication agreements, the formal task that you have to talk about, I promise you, you're going to have conflict faster than those teams who have honest, transparent, and vulnerable team dynamics. The conflict is either brewing or it's happening, because it's natural that people will self-protect and stop sharing information or thoughts fully when they feel like that's not wanted, accepted, or appreciated, and the team will get dumber. So having a foundational practice that you as a team agree to for preventing and managing conflict as it happens is going to positively impact your team's performance and the emotional bandwidth that you have as a collective. You will learn to trust each other more instead of less. So start by anchoring the team's way of thinking of itself as a team. We're in this together. So create virtual team agreements based on your new environment and based on respect, based on the team preferences as much as possible, and based on the work that you have to do. The work processes that worked 3 weeks ago may need to change a little bit when you go 100% virtual. And if your team dynamics are based on trust, you can have those conversations instead of getting upset. Next, we want to talk about 5 really critical symptoms that are a cocktail for dumb teams, and they're early warning signs that when you address them early in the team's development or transition to this new environment, they can actually be launch pads for team brilliance. And the first thing to look for is a loss of focus. As we've been saying, the low-touch communication of virtual work leads to miscommunication and information not being shared that normally would be almost invisibly. So this is a significant risk of misconstrued messages and missing information, creating a loss of focus for people when they're working in an isolated environment and not used to doing so. So if it's not fixed, it will lead to conflict and withdrawal. But if managed proactively, what might have become a conflict can be clarifying for team workflows. So if you're experiencing frequent direction switches, or people getting confused without warning or reason, or you notice that there are differences erupting about what the team should do next, that's an indication that the team is confused about something, or the team's communication or protocols are breaking down and they need to be realigned. Don't wait. Call the relevant people in and have the conversation to get back on track and help people get restarted. The second cardinal warning sign of virtual conflict is when you notice that there's excessive caution on your team. You know, maybe normally outspoken team members have become suddenly withdrawn. That happens occasionally. More often, though, is that work products or suggestions for improvement aren't offered, or they're very timidly introduced. If you notice those kinds of changes in your team dynamic, set up some one-on-ones and ask how you can help. Ask what's working, what's not, and why. This is a perfect time to have permission to pursue problem solving, because this is nobody's fault, but it's a great opportunity to move past caution. The third warning sign of virtual conflict is if you notice sudden communication pattern changes. Sometimes it will drop, as I've talked about with the excessive caution, but more often you're going to notice a sudden uptick in communication, more emails, more people being copied in on things. I call this information obesity that gets in the way of clarity, but it happens for really good reasons. Sudden information obesity or somebody going MIA are big clues that somebody is unclear about what's going on. They're usually wanting to make sure that you know they're working, or to make sure that they've covered their bases and that everybody has all of the information so nothing can come back on me. It's often an indication of insecurity and lack of clarity. So when you see that happening, again, schedule some one-on-ones or a team meeting and offer some acknowledgement, some recognition that this is hard and it is challenging, and reassure people that we can get through this together. But as Kathy said, transparency and over-communication is the rule of the day until rhythms develop for your team and you can start settling into some effective habits. The fourth warning sign, and this came up earlier as one of the first questions asked in chat, is over-management. You know, we as managers like to control the controllable. And when you suddenly in a virtual team environment and you're used to seeing people every day, over-management can provide an illusion of certainty, but it really just creates a big brother feeling. Structure should be the servant, not the master of your team. So develop simple rules, simple protocols, simple ways of communicating that are consistent with your team's culture. And adapt. Just every week, have a meeting to say, okay, how do we need to adapt the way we're communicating and connecting until you find the balance for the work that needs to be done and the people whose care and feeding needs to be part of your job. So in addition to that, with over-management, you will be over-communicating in ways, and that's okay. But if it's in the plan, if you schedule one-on-ones on a regular basis and standing team meetings, people will know it's just part of our way of connecting instead of a check-in to see if I'm doing everything right. If you're not already, now that you're virtual, get the team working together on a task management or a project management tool also. You know, the technology is there to help you manage performance so that you don't have to overmanage. And the last warning sign is probably the most critical, and that's when conflict goes underground. You know, people really aren't comfortable with conflict, no matter how effective and powerful and necessary and inevitable it is. So the virtual environment really makes it easier to kind of cop out, to kind of disappear, to let the conflict go underground, because you don't have to address it, or at least you think you don't have to address it. Sometimes people are being too nice to each other. That's a sign that conflict is going underground, and there's not enough healthy difference of opinion. Unfortunately, the goal is to retain trust and to save relationships, but what happens instead is that trust can be broken as a result. So let's talk a little more about underground conflict in the next slide. You know, the best laid plans aren't going to anticipate everything. Conflict is going to brew anyway. So remember that we try to avoid conflict. So build the intentional transparency and asking of the question and clarifying of the communication. Bring that into the way the team communicates intentionally, on purpose, and actually seek it out so that virtual teams can't avoid the differences of opinion, and they will suss out how to come together and be in agreement. Communication mishaps will happen, like we've discussed. It's really up to you and your team whether or not those mishaps lead to trust breakdowns or trust building. When we don't see each other, some of the quieter members will become invisible if they're left alone. So remember to connect on purpose for task, relationship, and the team well-being. because otherwise people are going to hesitate to speak up when they're uncomfortable or not sure, since it's easier to hide frustration virtually. It's never good to take conflict underground. So let's talk about some relationship management best practices first, and then some task conflict management best practices next. The relationship conflict next practices. Healthy teams are everybody's job, not just the managers. So all virtual team members need to take responsibility and co-manage healthy group functioning. So if there's a conflict brewing or an approach disagreement, as the team leader, make sure the right people are in that conversation. Don't have that conversation if one of the stakeholders isn't there. At the same time, don't have that conversation in an open forum if it doesn't impact anybody. Keep it private unless something's obviously blown up in public, and then it becomes a group event to manage and discuss. But just nip it in the bud. If you see somebody communicating differently, withdrawing more than they used to, or emailing and copying everybody in and over communicating, just set up a one-on-one and say, what's going on? What's working? What's not? And why? So that you and they together can nip some habits that might have worked in a co-located environment become a problem in the virtual work environment. So you can kind of nip those habits in the bud and rebuild trust. What you're really doing is setting up team agreements that establish swift trust. We assume everybody's going to do the right thing and do what we all committed to doing, and then you manage to exception when that doesn't happen, and ideally have the team bring it up with each other and take yourself out of the middle. All right, virtual work makes relationships a little less easy to read. So if you're not sure something is troubling, just ask. And the last thing I would really say that's so critical is we all just need to publicly and completely commit to assuming positive intent. We're not trying to hurt each other or piss each other off or let each other down. We're doing the best we can. Now let's talk about task conflict management best practices for a second. First of all, again, confirm that the team structure really aligns with the work getting done the best way. Some things may need to adapt or shift a little bit in the virtual work environment. So just make that part of your standing meeting conversation instead of a problem to be solved. Does everyone have a shared understanding of the task that is creating conflict? Do we agree on what that task is or should be and what the outcome is we're looking for? If not, let's use that friction to have the conversation to get back to clarity. Is everyone in agreement about how the work gets done? Again, communicate, communicate, communicate. It's just, unfortunately or fortunately, what we have to do right now. So the other thing is that our jobs aren't technically changing, just our work environment. But the work environment brings with it potentially some new roles or some new tasks and responsibilities for all of us as team members. We're all responsible for reaching out to each other and helping each other do a good job and find the balance we need to get it all done. So if this is all new to you, at least touch down weekly with your whole team on what's working, what's not, and what you want to do to course correct over the next week. Adjust and iterate it often and do it without blame, because again, we're assuming positive intent and we're figuring this out. The other thing to do is encourage people to ask, to advocate, to speak up, to disagree respectfully, because that's when the intelligence of a team comes forward. And always be that role model who proactively reaches out to connect to people and help everyone get on the right page. So let's talk just a minute about prevention, because that truly is the best practice. Be conscious of the impact that time and distance have on relationships. There is an unconscious bias that we all have when we work virtually. It's been researched and documented. It's actually a phenomenon called distance bias. So and we're not going to take time with that today. We don't have time, but just know that it's real, that we tend to trust and depend on people who are near to us in time and space. So when we take that distance and put that in the middle, we just need to be very conscious about connecting and managing the risk of isolation and loneliness and conflict. Team leaders really move teams from structured to genuine trust by breaking down those barriers to connection and really advocating for talking and advocating for the position you hold and the way you want to move forward. You want teams thinking about the work, not wondering how to proceed or worrying about how somebody's going to react to an email. So how do we do that? I'll briefly introduce you to the 3 practices of a virtual leader that will lead to high performance virtual teams. And the first practice is to develop your team to succeed. Find those team rhythms and flows that work for your team. Have the conversations and agree together about what our communication and workflow protocols are going to be. Where are we going to store our documents? What is our naming protocol so that we can all find each other's work when we need to and collaborate on it together? Build in standing meetings, have fixed agenda items that you cover all the time and flexible agenda items so that you can iterate and adjust as things come up in this new world environment. And ask yourselves as a team, what do we want to kind of routinize? What do we want to put into a habit so that it becomes automatically and we don't have to think about it so we can become more efficient and effective? And then ask yourselves as a team, what do we want to do to bring variety and keep it fresh so that we just don't go into robot mode when we come together as a team? You know, do you want to have virtual happy hours every week or once a month? Do you want to have lunch and learns where you learn a tool together? Do you want to give each other virtual office tours on video and look at each other's bookshelves and tchotchkes? You know, have some fun with how you come together, but be intentional so that you're expanding the emotional bandwidth of your relationships while you're clarifying the work to be done. If you've got other tips and tools and ideas for how to do that, please add those in the chat too. And again, there are many experts in the room, not just Kathy and me. Second path to high performance virtual teams is to do ongoing prevention practice. And that's to intentionally and consistently connect your team, support your team. Connected teams don't happen by themselves. It takes a commitment and an intention to ensure that people feel safe showing up and telling the truth. How well does your team communicate, not only on task, but informally? Pay attention, look for that, and encourage more of that. And an overlooked way to reduce conflict is really super basic. It's to connect on purpose, because we all need to belong. We don't want to feel cut off from our worlds. So take time to help teams connect. Also, be kind and considerate, especially when giving feedback virtually. People really hesitate to reach out and ask for help or to ask the question, and they'll do so even less if they feel unsafe or cautious. So be truthful, be trustworthy, be fair, reach out to everyone, and take time to get to know each other's habits and preferences. What do your teams do to build that sense of connectedness? Again, add tips in the chat room if you've got other ideas to add. So let's put this all together in one graphic that kind of gives you an overview of my virtual management model to high performance teams. The first path, again, is to develop your team and create these new habits that keep your team smart, collaborative, and functioning. The second path is to connect that team and provide that support. But the last path is just as important. That's to produce your successful outcomes, to deliver results. We all want to be part of a winning team. And the truth of the matter is we're often so busy moving on to the next task that we don't take time to stop and say, hey, we did this. Let's celebrate. When virtual, please take 5 minutes or an hour to celebrate success. I highly encourage all of you to have a 15-minute with your team before the end of the week and say, let's look at ourselves and give ourselves a pat on the back. What are we doing that is great and that we can build on? All right, so that kind of gives a wrap up of some very simple things we can do to be proactive with conflict management. Now I'm going to turn it over to Kathy to bring us home.
All right, thank you, Trina, and thanks to everybody. We've been busy in the chat, sharing ideas and asking questions. You know, a lot of the practices that we have outlined, this is just good common sense, good team operating procedures, right? But experience tells me that very, very few teams have had the time or taken the time to outline their own rules of the road for responding to and managing conflict. I even asked in the chat, has anyone done this? Has anyone put a team operating procedure in place? And we haven't, but I believe that this current crisis is the exact right time to ask teams to put their own processes in place as they continue to adapt to this, you know, the current situation. It's through these discussions that they will become more aligned and more focused and more accomplished. You know, we have all been so wrapped up in the work, the urgent work of the day, that we rarely have time to do this important foundational work. And as our workloads perhaps shift or our bandwidth changes, this could be, like I said, the exact right time to start outlining these processes and putting them in place and keeping them in a living document that you can go back to and update and change as the way we work continues to change, and use them for onboarding tools or orientation tools, team discussion guides as you and your teams move forward. This is a unique time for everyone, and how we respond to it and what we look like when we come out of this. It's going to be, you know, it's going to be interesting, and nobody can guess what's going to happen. But working on these competencies right now, we know is going to be good for everyone and in the long run. Now we have 10 minutes left. If there are questions or best practices, we can you can unmute yourself. You can type your questions in the comments. I am recording. The session has been recorded. So I'm going to share this back with all of you if you want to share this with your team. We can do that. We'll share the slides as well. And I want to also let you know that our website, The Smart Workplace, has some very fun and interesting assessments. There is a SMART team assessment. There's this conflict management style assessment, and this is a fun activity. You know, these are all free. Just have people go and log in. It's a nice discussion guide, and it kind of pulls the curtain back on our own behaviors. You know, it's much like a DISC assessment, but these are all, you know, different activities that will help generate conversations to keep teams connected, transparent, and building trust. Virtual leader readiness assessment is a good one if you don't have, if virtual leading is kind of new for the organization. I think that one is very helpful. And my personal favorite, yes, ladies and gentlemen, it's what animal personality is your manager? You know, go to the website, check it out, have some fun, and do continue to ask questions. Trina and I are going to be continuing to post free resources on LinkedIn. And we have a mailing list too if you're interested in joining that. But our mission right now in this crazy and critical time is to do what we can to support you to make sure that great work is happening everywhere, regardless of the situation. Gina, any last thoughts?
Yeah, well, this is your opportunity to ask some questions, folks. You know, something else that For those of you that are taking advantage of our free resources, we thank you for that. We want our information to get out there and be well used. For those of you that want a little more hand-holding, we are discounting our coaching services in as few as 5-hour blocks if you just want that backstop to help you get through this time and know you've got a ready resource that you can just talk things through with privately. But we're here for you. As Kathy said, we're going to be posting tips and tools on LinkedIn and on Facebook and Twitter, and helping to get some great stuff out there to help you guys thrive.
Mm-hmm. And as I said, we don't know what this is. Let's see. Please elaborate on avoiding the temptation to resolve conflict. Well, okay, yeah, I can do this.
Go ahead, Kathy.
No, you go ahead.
I was just going to make a joke and say never break up by text. I mean,
that's great.
is a great question. Just as a team, sometimes we're forced to kind of begin a clarifying conversation in the written word just because of the nature of the speed of work. But when possible, those should be voice conversations, preferably on a video conferencing tool where you can actually see each other to have the conversation. And if as a team, you can make the rule, we will not manage conflict by email or text. I mean, that's an agreement, Steve, and to everybody that you and your team have to make. When is it okay to push it out in a flat medium, and when should you have the conversation? It's kind of like performance management. You tend not to fire people by text. Even though we see it happening in our world today, it's not a good practice. Kathy,
right,
what would you add?
I would just say it's kind of like if you have a thorn in your finger. My temptation is to soak the thorn in water for days if I have to let it gently come out. I don't want it to be painful. But the best solution, of course, is to just yank it out. And that's how it is with conflict. The best solution is to face it head on, face to face, on video. Because when we are communicating through email or texting, we have some time to get a little bit perhaps too creative in our responses and a little bit too defensive. We can build up our defense, much more. We can articulate it much better on the flat medium, as Trina said, and then it just turns into a long and drawn out process. I think when people are face to face looking into each other's eyes, that's the way that you're going to get to a resolution, a real resolution, not this back and forth, who's saying the most clever thing and who can we point the finger at. And Alfred says, are there any tools or reminders on how people learn and process?
Alfred, that's a great question. And I do a lot of, one of the things that I do in addition to what Kathy and I do together is work a lot with trainers and teachers and instructors on how people learn and process virtually. So I am going to share with the whole room my email, and Alfred, feel free to email me later and we can have a little talk about that, because it's a little outside of the scope of the virtual conflict topic of tonight, but I'm happy to have the conversation with you. Other questions or comments? We're coming very close to the hour. We've got 5 minutes, and that's a rich 5 minutes we would like to use well with you. Questions, comments, or ideas? And you can unmute yourself also, by the way, if you'd like to ask.
Vince says, during these times, how do you find the balance of empathy and caring for everyone? Oh, yeah, and I did reply, I don't know if you saw my reply back in a private chat to you, Vince, but it's so true. With generating enough revenue, how is the organization staying fiscally responsible at the same time being empathetic and caring for all of the employees, right? And this is where I say the word of the day that comes into play is transparency, to really being transparent about what is the reality of the workload that's coming across our desk, across our organization. And then I don't know how large your organization is, Vince. If it's a smaller organization, to like my son's company, right now, they have a bunch of account managers, and they are very slow because the accounts are not very active right now. Everyone's in lockdown. They also have a very large tech support help desk presence, and that group is very, very busy. So what's happening is they are cross-training the people who are account reps into some of the basic support roles of the help desk. So they're looking across the organization and trying to be creative about how can we keep people active, engaged, and earning and bringing value, because it's not a social service. Business is about making money and surviving, and other creative ways to perhaps focus on upskilling at this time. So investing now in upskilling populations. So when it's over, you are better prepared for the work ahead. And another idea is if there's going to be a reduction, can the organization reduce across all levels a little bit instead of reduce, targeted populations a lot? But I think it's all about that transparency. And Trina, if you want to add anything to that.
No, I'm looking at the next question that Alfred is asking about how do you address the conflict about the latest essential and unessential designation, the responsibilities and selection of who's remote and physically present. Negotiate is my very simple one-word answer. That's a tough one. I mean, that really is, again, get the right people in the room, get the right environment so people tell the truth about what they think should happen, and then mediate and negotiate until you come to some semblance of what works. I had a conversation last night with someone about he's designated admin, so he has to come into work. That just, that doesn't make any sense. How do you set up the conversation to be fair to everybody about who's remote, who's physically present? It's a tough one. Mm-hmm. It's a tough one, Alfred. Mm-hmm. But it's a great chance to practice some of the principles that we've been talking about here today, because people are very emotional about this and not always seeing with their full brain. So calm down, know that we're in this together, and negotiate until you come up with something that works for everybody as best as possible.
And the other thing, Trina, to respond to Alfred's question, is that many of our states are mandating exactly who's essential and who has to be, who has to be in the room and who can't be in the room. We know our nurses, our doctors, or this or that. And then there's a second layer of essential employees. In Minnesota, there's a website we can go to that identifies. But if the governor says everybody work from home, if you're essential, the governor and the state will determine, those essential workers. So, yeah. Anyway, that's my thought on that. But
Thank you, everybody, for being here and joining in. It was a delight for us to bring something of value to you. And Kathy and I are talking about potentially doing something like this again. If you're interested, just let us know.
Yeah, we'll stay in touch with you. Take good care, everybody. Stay safe, stay home, keep your hands clean.
Bye.
Bye.